This story began in a bladesmith's workshop, where a boy stood holding a newly forged sword that was still red-hot. His expression showed that he had lost everything in life. Minute after minute, he stared down at the sword, his expression shifting constantly, until it settled into sheer determination, the look of someone who had no other choice. Finally, he brought the blade to his mouth and, with savage resolve, took a bite, chewing on the metal. A while ago, ever since he was young, his father had often told him a story. Remember this well, Arhan. As a member of the caravan family, this is a story you must never forget. Although we now live in this small village far from the capital, 200 years ago our family's status was unmatched. We produced a knight known as the God of War, and righteous supervisors favored by the king and respected by all. Our family was chosen by the sword, producing swordsmasters for generations. That is why everyone treated us with reverence, the invincible protectors, the caravans. Arhan, you will one day take my place and become the head of the caravan family. You must always live with the pride of caravan flowing through your veins. To reclaim our glory and stand tall once more as protectors of this land, that is the duty of the caravans. But Arhan found it hard to believe this tale. To him, it sounded like nothing more than disgraced nobles clinging to past glory, something far too common. If the stories about the caravans were true, they wouldn't be living as landlords in a poor village. They wouldn't be spending their days working the fields alongside their tenants. There were too many holes in his father's story. The family's founder, the idolized figure in the portrait, looked nothing like either his father or himself, no matter how long he studied it. The ancestral sword passed down through the family was supposedly hundreds of years old, yet it remained far too sharp and pristine. Most damning of all, not a single history book in the kingdom mentioned the name of their alleged ancestor, Liam Caravan. Considering all this, there was only one conclusion: these were tall tales, fabricated to give their descendants something to be proud of. As Arhan stood atop a cliff watching the sun sink below the horizon, someone called out to him, saying it was time for a snack break. They teased him, warning that they would eat all the warm bread if he didn't return in time. He looked back at them and smiled. So what if the caravans weren't a great family? Everyone here welcomed him, and he loved this place where he could live among them. This, to him, was the caravan he wanted, just the way things were now. Or so he thought, in his peaceful and complacent state. At dusk, Arhan said he had harvested enough for the day and was heading back through the market. He asked if there was anything anyone wanted him to bring back. Would Kun like some apples? He's been grumbling about not seeing any fruit for a while, right? Kun's father smiled and thanked him. Turning to Marino, Arhan added, and Marino's youngest daughter's birthday is coming up soon. I'll buy her a pretty doll if I see one. Surprised, she asked. Oh? How did you know that? He winked. I know everything. After all, I'm going to be the next lord around here. He rode off on his horse as everyone waved goodbye. The villagers all liked Arhan very much. He treated them with care and gentleness. Deciding to finish their work before it got too late, they began discussing their regular meeting scheduled for today with. Before the sentence could be finished, a slash tore across a man's face, blood spilling everywhere. Marino turned toward him, but before she could react, her own face was split in half. One by one, they were slaughtered, and the crops slowly turned red. The man responsible kept muttering that this land had to be erased. Later that night, when Arhan returned to the village, the gifts he had brought slipped from his hands at the sight before him. Trembling in terror, he whispered into the empty air. Why is everyone dead? A man stepped beside him and gently closed his eyes. Don't look, young master. Arhan's hands shook violently. Butler, something's wrong. I must be seeing things. The villagers. The butler spoke in a low voice. He came, saying that the caravans must be erased. It took only 10 minutes. Wielding his blade with cold indifference, a man appeared without warning and took the lives of half the villagers. Arhan arrived at the palace to find it drenched in blood. Everyone there had been slaughtered. The sight shattered him, and he collapsed to his knees, unable to control either his body or his emotions. Amid the sudden, horrifying disaster, he heard someone calling his name. He froze. It was his mother's voice. The moment she saw her son enter the palace, she ran toward him. That single sound became a fragile glimpse of hope. She threw herself into his arms, clutching him tightly. She had nearly lost her only son, and the relief of seeing him alive was immeasurable. She wept uncontrollably, repeating how grateful she was that he was safe. For a fleeting moment, the fierce embrace of a mother eased Arhan's terror. Then he saw his father, a man who looked like a corpse brought back to life. His father kept muttering the same word over and over. Why? He could not form any other thought or sentence. His legs gave out, and he collapsed in front of his wife and son. In that moment, Arhan realized that the tragedy had only just begun. For reasons unknown, the swordsmaster who had wiped out half of the caravan territory in an instant had spared his parents. He delivered only a warning. He said he would return in 1 month, and if they wished to live, they were to leave this land with everyone else before then. As the man turned to leave, Arhan's father demanded, "Why are you doing this to us? What crime did we commit to deserve this?" The swordsman answered coldly that he was merely following orders. After he departed, leaving behind nothing but incomprehensible words, the surviving villagers began to flee one by one. It may have been the only way to save lives, but the caravan family was not even granted that choice. Arhan's father was crushed beneath the weight of responsibility. In his mind, he was still the great knight who hunted nightmares, the iron-blooded guardian who protected the kingdom. He believed it was his duty to behead the great evil that would soon return. He swore to the heavens that he would never abandon this land. But these were nothing more than desperate thoughts born of helplessness. In truth, he was utterly incapable of fulfilling his role as lord. A few nights later, Arhan's mother took him aside and told him that the butler had prepared a carriage. Arhan would be leaving the territory with him. She urged her son to go as far away as possible. Arhan was stunned. He demanded that his parents come with him. But his mother shook her head. His father could not leave. Until the very end, he intended to face the enemy as the Lord of Caravan. And as his partner, she would remain by his side until that moment. Arhan broke down, crying and begging her not to do this. Then she said words that shattered his world. "Remember this, Arhan. The stories your father told you are not true. The talents of a righteous guardian, the invincible protector, they are nothing but lies written into history. So promise me something. Promise me you will never pick up a sword in your life. Promise me you will survive, no matter what. Do not seek revenge. Just live for yourself." The butler arrived and announced that everything was ready. She turned to him and asked him to look after her son, to make sure he traveled as far away as possible before that man returned. Arhan resisted with all his strength, but the butler forced him into the carriage, tears streaming down his face. His mother told him that she loved him one last time as the carriage pulled away, forever. Inside the palace, Arhan's father lost his sanity. He repeatedly slammed his head against the wall until blood covered his face. His wife approached him from behind and held him tightly, telling him not to suffer alone. At the very least, she would stay with him until the end. As the carriage traveled onward, the butler tried to reason with Arhan. "Young master, I know this pain is unbearable. That man is a calamity, a natural disaster no human can overcome. You must accept this tragedy and forget it if you wish to go on living. The lord and lady would have wanted you to survive." When there was no response, the butler turned around. The carriage was empty. Arhan had jumped out earlier and run back toward the palace. No matter how he thought about it, he could not leave alone. How could he abandon his parents? That man might be called a calamity, but he was still human. A man who would die if an arrow pierced his heart. Over the past month, Arhan had prepared a deadly poison. If he could land a single shot, he could protect them. But the moment he reached the palace, every plan collapsed. His father's severed head hung from a pole atop the palace. His mother lay lifeless on the ground where she had bid her son farewell. The man who had slaughtered them spoke calmly. "How foolish! Have you come to embrace death after all? I showed you mercy yet." Arhan screamed, screams filled with pain, rage, and despair. He drew his bow and aimed the poisoned arrow at the swordsman, shouting that he would kill him. With a single glance, the swordsman nearly ended Arhan's life. The bow slipped from Arhan's hands as he clutched his throat, choking for air. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, his vision fading. The swordsman walked past him and said coldly, "Consider yourself lucky. I will not take your life today. Go and drown in your despair. Not a single trace of caravans may remain on this continent. If you dare continue that bloodline, I will find you again. Caravan must disappear." He released Arhan from his chokehold and left. Arhan crawled to his mother and lifted her into his arms. He wailed endlessly, with no one to stop his pain and no end to his sorrow. That day, he lost everything. Or so he thought. A year had passed since Arhan buried them all in one corner of the estate. In that time, he devoted himself entirely to preparing for revenge. At the pinnacle stood the man now hailed as the strongest sword on the continent, a guardian who protected the kingdom's peace, a righteous sentinel who eradicated evil, a superhuman whose talent eclipsed even other sword masters. Carlos, wielder of the swords. That was the name and fame of the man who had taken everything from Arhan. Everything remained a question. Why had he killed his family? Who was truly behind it all? What secrets did the Caravan family even hold? Yet one truth was undeniable. The lives of the caravans who had died so senselessly would never return. But what is this? Arhan muttered as he stared at the shining portrait of his ancestor. Had the weight of these unanswered mysteries finally driven him mad? Something impossible unfolded before his eyes. The portrait that had been glowing moments ago moved, and stepped out of the frame. "Arhan Caravan," it said, "show some respect. I am your ancestor." Arhan staggered back, convinced it had to be a lie. Yet there he stood, the legendary figure from the portraits and stories. He had heard of such things before. People who suffered severe mental shock often experienced vivid hallucinations. And yet, he could not dismiss what stood before him so easily. His ancestor spoke again. "I sense your wavering. Are you afraid you finally lost your sanity? Or is it that an ancestor you dismissed as fantasy has appeared before you, leaving you utterly stunned?" Arhan steadied himself and forced out the words. "If this isn't an illusion, if this is truly real, then are you really the founder of our family? The strongest swords master in history, Liam Caravan? If you are truly the man from my father's heroic tales, then why are you only appearing before me now?" His emotions finally broke free. "Why now?" Arhan screamed. "After all this time?" Liam waited a moment before answering. "Because I needed to test you myself. Revenge is an ordeal that should never be undertaken unless one is prepared to give up everything. For the past year, I have watched you, every single day. Despite your pitiful, hopeless talent, which you yourself are well aware of, you never once abandoned your sword. Not for a single day. Not even for a moment did you waver." He continued calmly. "You ask why I appear now. The answer is simple. The hatred in your eyes has finally reached the depth I desired. And my own patience has reached its limit. The murderous intent within me longs to tear apart the one who slaughtered my descendants and defiled my land." Liam's gaze sharpened. "Throughout the history of this continent, one fact has never been disproven. Only a sword master can kill a sword master. You already know this. That is why you swing your blade with such stubborn resolve. But on your own, you could train for a lifetime and still never reach him. A sword master was a transcendent existence, beyond the limits of humanity. A level of skill even so-called geniuses could never hope to attain. And among sword masters, Carlos stood even higher. Even in my era, during the Age of War," Liam said, "there were only a handful of warriors who could rival him. In this generation, no one can kill him. And as time passes, he will only grow stronger." Arhan knew the gap between them was vast. But to hear it described as more than difficult, to hear it was impossible, crushed him. So he was meant to watch the bastard who destroyed his life rise as a hero. "I'm powerless once again," he thought. But Liam pulled him back from despair. From this moment on, things will change. I will help you. You will become a sharper, stronger blade than him. As a member of Caravan, you will be the one to judge that murderer." He stepped closer. "There is only one path a Caravan can take. Eat my sword, descendant of steel blood." And so, they went to the bladesmith's workshop. The Caravan bloodline was a fusion of human and dwarven blood. As Arhan placed the sword into the fire, Liam explained, "It began with me, a half-dwarf. Though the physical traits are faint, dwarven blood carries a special ability passed down to our descendants. The power to consume swords. By doing so, you inherit the memories and skills of their wielders. This is how the Caravan family produced sword masters generation after generation. The source of the power that made us great." Arhan's thoughts raced. Inheriting power by eating swords. Dwarves are known as friends of iron and fire, but I've never heard of such an absurd ability. The stories felt unreal, bordering on madness. But truth was proven only through results. "I don't have the luxury to hesitate," he decided. "Accepting this madness?" Arhan asked. "Tell me how to consume the sword." "The method is simple," Liam replied. "Heat the blade until it softens, then swallow it." Arhan did not hesitate. Perhaps he was trapped in a nightmare. Perhaps he had already lost his mind. Perhaps this was nothing more than a phantom leading him astray. Even so, if there was even the slightest chance, he would take it. He pulled the sword from the fire and bit down. Instantly, his entire body ignited in agony. Flames seemed to erupt inside him, consuming him from within. He screamed as he dropped the blade and clutched his throat, collapsing to the ground. The pain was unbearable. He screamed again and again. But he refused to surrender. He remembered the injustice inflicted upon his family. He remembered the horrors he had witnessed as a child. He remembered why he was still alive. With trembling hands, he grabbed the sizzling sword once more and forced it into his mouth. "I will become one," he vowed. "Even if it costs me my life, I will become one. I will become a sword master, to kill him." After finishing the sword, Arhan fell unconscious. A long time passed before he awoke. The moment he did, he screamed in shock. He was alive. Not only that, every wound on his body had vanished. He vividly remembered the agony of chewing and swallowing the blade, the unbearable pain that had scorched him from the inside. For a moment, he wondered if everything that happened the day before had been nothing more than a dream. Thankfully, that was not the case. If it had been a dream, there would be no reason for only the hilt of the sword to be lying beside him. Liam spoke suddenly. "At the very least, your mental fortitude is commendable, unlike your hopelessly weak body. Even among your ancestors, some could not endure the searing pain. More than a few gave up halfway. Do you believe me now? All the legends about the caravans your father told you are true. And I am no mere hallucination." At those words, Arhan knelt on one knee and bowed deeply. "I, Arhan Caravan, greet the progenitor." Liam stood before him and instructed him to call him master, as all his descendants did. "I understand, master," Arhan replied. "Does this mean that, just as my father said, I have inherited your great power? Last night you mentioned that I could gain strength by consuming swords. However, I don't feel that much has changed." Liam cleared his throat awkwardly before answering. "About that, there has been a slight problem. To be precise, the problem lies with you, not me." Arhan asked what that meant. "My original plan was for you to consume my beloved sword and ascend directly to the level of a sword master. However, perhaps because my blood has thinned over the generations, while you have inherited the ability to consume swords, your capacity to digest the power contained within them has weakened considerably. To put it simply, in your current state, it is impossible for you to fully assimilate the essence of my sword." Instead of growing angry, Arhan nodded calmly. "I see. If you say so, master, then it must be true." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Is that all you have to say?" "I was already aware of my body's weakness," Arhan replied. "Though I'm disappointed, I'm grateful that another path still remains." Liam asked what path he meant. "You said it's impossible in my current state," Arhan answered. "That means someday, I will be able to handle your power. Until then, I should start with a sword I can manage. In other words, I just need to find one. Liam smiled. You already possess the intuition of a sword master. The more worn and used a sword is, the better. Guide me to a place where old, shabby weapons are abundant. I will choose one for you. Arhan led Liam to an abandoned battlefield dump yard. Liam remarked that the place felt gloomy, exactly the sort of environment necromancers would love. All the discarded things from the slums end up here, Arhan explained. From worthless scrap metal to unusable weapons. There's no better place to find a sword that meets your conditions, Master. Liam nodded. A good start. In the beginning, I too devoured swords in places thick with the stench of blood. Blades clutched by fallen soldiers, axes caked in mud and gore, spears with shattered shafts scattered across the ground. I ate and ate with everything I had, simply to grow stronger and survive. His voice grew distant. This place reminds me of those days. To protect the sparks of life, we clashed endlessly, breaking ourselves in the process. Some died the same day. Others lived to see tomorrow. Those days themselves were a battlefield. In most struggles, countless lives vanish without leaving a trace. And yet, a select few leave behind a single, dazzling point of light. Liam found that light. He pointed toward a sword and instructed his young descendant to take it. And thus Arhan beheld the second sword he would devour. 1 month later, a group of thieves crept into Arhan's palace under the cover of night. The unusually empty village had led them to believe the place was abandoned. Some suspected a warlock might have once used the mansion for forbidden experiments. But if that were true, they would have died the moment they stepped inside. So they concluded it was likely the residence of a fallen noble hiding in isolation. Doesn't this place reek of wealth? One of them said. Our luck's finally turned. This'll be a piece of cake. If there isn't even a caretaker, another added. That says it all. As they made themselves comfortable, one of the thieves wandered off to rummage through the rooms. He soon discovered freshly washed women's clothes, and twisted excitement lit up their faces. Then a calm voice spoke. Stop. My mother liked things to be tidy. She truly hated it when her belongings were disturbed. Put that down, quietly. Arhan slowly stepped forward to face his uninvited guests. They had expected adults. Seeing only a boy, they let out sighs of relief. Their disappointment was clear. It wasn't a woman. Arhan spoke again. Did you come here seeking food, or merely a place to stay? If it's one of those, say so. I'm willing to accept you as guests. The bald man sneered. What are you babbling about, brat? Have you lost your mind? You nobles really lack common sense. You should have stayed hidden. Why crawl out and make a fuss? He lunged at Arhan, asking if he was eager to die. Arhan did not flinch. At the precise moment, he struck the man down with his sword. So, Arhan said calmly, steadying his breath. You were intruders, not guests. Earlier, when Arhan and Liam found the second sword, they brought it to the bladesmith's workshop to soften it. As they worked, Arhan asked, Master, is this really the sword I'm supposed to eat? This feels less like a sword and more like a needle. It seems like it would snap the moment I tried to cut anything with it. Liam replied calmly. That's only natural. It was never meant for slashing enemies, nor for crushing them. This weapon was forged for a single purpose. In decisive battles, where life and death hang in the balance, it exists to pierce an enemy's vital points and end their life. It is a sword meant to thrust. Arhan still doubted its sturdiness. Liam sensed his hesitation and said, Your expression tells me you think a spear would be better. That question is not without merit. However, the memories dwelling within that sword are precisely what your weak and fragile body needs. For your information, before her death, the previous owner single-handedly pierced the lives of over 2,000 enemies, with a body even more slender than yours. She was a woman. Liam's voice grew solemn. So treat that sword with the respect it deserves, and consume it with gratitude. The weight of its sins may be light, but the life swelling within it is immeasurably heavy and sacred. There is much for you to gain from inheriting that woman's memories. The last thing the child remembered was a burning mansion. When the girl, barely 10 years old, opened her eyes, everything had changed. Her parents had been reduced to ashes in the inferno, their forms unrecognizable. When she was told that she alone had barely survived, she whispered softly, "I wish I had died with them." After losing everything in an instant, she was sent to live in an old orphanage, one that worshipped the goddess of fire. The day she learned that this place believed force was salvation, she was dragged into despair once again. She, who had lost everything to fire, was forced to live in a place that revered it. She realized she had never truly escaped the flames. The days that followed were horribly peaceful. A scar marked her face from the accident, and the other children never let her forget it. They judged her constantly, whispering and pointing. They said the mark was proof of a curse. They called her creepy, monster, disgusting, horrible, anything they could think of. She wanted to die. Every day, she prayed for death to come for her again, so she could escape the fire that had scarred her face, the same fire she saw whenever she closed her eyes, and the fire of hatred that surrounded her whenever she opened them. Until one day. Looking back, his swordsmanship was rough and crude. But it possessed a strange beauty, enough to make her forget, if only for a moment, the hell that filled her mind and brought it to a halt. His name was Yahello. He was an old swordsman, a former wandering knight who had worked at the orphanage for many years. Normally, she would never have dared to speak to an old man with such a harsh face. Yet that day, she slowly approached him and asked, "How can I become like you, sir? I want to learn." That was her first step toward wanting to live. He replied, "This won't help you much in life, Mary. Especially not for a girl like you. A blade like this will only end up hurting you. Please go back." She cut him off mid-sentence. "If I can learn that, then no fire in this world will ever scare me again." Moved by her words, he took her to a barn and laid several swords before her. "Choose one," he said. "If you can even swing it, I'll teach you." She studied the swords for a moment, then asked, "Do I have to swing it? If not that, then what?" the man asked. "As long as I can fight back," she replied. "I'll become whatever I need to be." She chose the narrow, pointed sword and thrust it toward the man's neck. Just like Arhan did when he killed the first intruder. It was her first thrust. The others froze in shock. They had never expected a child to take someone down with a single, precise strike. Liam looked at his descendant and thought, for the past month, I taught him only one thing, a physical training method that allows him to run for hours without tiring. I did not teach him swordsmanship at all. And yet, the fact that he could perform a thrust like that means he has properly digested it. Liam's gaze sharpened. "Now show me, my young descendant, your first step as a caravan." The spot the intruder had been pierced, between the ribs, directly into the lungs, was a place that could only be reached through absolute precision. Someone like Arhan, who had no prior experience killing and no real training with a sword, should never have been able to execute such a thrust. And yet, there was only one explanation. The owner of the needle he had consumed a month ago, Mary. Mary's memories. Since that day, Yahello had taught her many things: how to stand, how to hold a sword, how to fight, and how to survive. Though his teachings were not built upon any rigid, systematic theory, Yahello's swordsmanship carried the romance and freedom he had gained as a wandering knight. To a girl who feared fire, it was a beauty beyond comparison. It held a quiet, resilient strength. She called it Yahello's blade, and she loved it with all her heart. A few years later, Yahello fell ill. On his deathbed, he told Mary one final thing. "Mary, the day will come when you must leave this place. When that day arrives, go out into the wider world. This is the last thing I can give you. My final lesson. I'm glad you were here at the end of my journey, Mary." He closed his eyes before finishing his sentence. With a heavy heart, she bowed and whispered, "Thank you for everything. Rest in peace, Yahello." Just as he had taught her, she left the orphanage and ventured into the world. Before long, she earned a name for herself as a fairly well-known mercenary. Perhaps it was because of her peculiar weapon, a blade as thin as a needle. Or perhaps because she was a young woman, a rarity in that profession. To the world, she became known as the sewing gypsy. Arhan relived all of Mary's memories. This was what Liam meant by digestion. Her experiences flowed directly into his mind, guiding his actions. The man Arhan had struck earlier lay on the floor, begging for his life. But Arhan could not hear his pleas over the rushing thoughts in his head, thoughts that urged him to end it cleanly. He knelt down on one knee and drove his sword straight through the center of the man's throat. This was Arhan's first kill. And yet, despite it being his first, he felt nothing. His vision focused only on what remained before him. He had found an opening earlier only because the man had underestimated him. Now, however, he was outnumbered. He could not expect the same luck again. They must have realized that as well. And yet, why weren't they charging him, when they held the numerical advantage? Liam sensed his thoughts and answered. They're terrified. And for good reason. The movements you just displayed are not something a beginner could perform. A moderate amount of fear helps one survive, but excessive fear clouds judgment. It makes the enemy appear far larger than they truly are, tricking the mind into believing they face something monstrous. Right now, Liam continued, in their eyes you are a murderous fiend, highly skilled with the sword. That was all Arhan needed. He charged. The bandits, already shaken, panicked as he rushed toward them, leaving themselves wide open. Arhan easily slipped past the first man's attack and thrust his sword into the side of his neck. In that instant, another of Mary's memories surfaced. Hika once said, as a woman without natural brute strength or stamina, time would never be on her side. Therefore, the enemy must be pierced on the first strike, or at the latest, the second. Arhan turned toward the next man, who wildly lashed out without any precision. Arhan sprinted at full speed, leapt over him, and before the man could react, struck his arm from behind. Do not try to fill what you lack. Instead, make what you have shine. These were the lessons that had guided Mary throughout her life. Her strength lay in her natural flexibility, a body like a dancer's. From any posture, from any angle, she could aim for her enemy's life. And that was what Arhan had inherited from her sword. The last remaining bandit could only tremble in place, staring at the murderous light burning in Arhan's eyes. Arhan was burying the bodies of the bandits when Liam asked, Now, will you cast away your doubts? If you have the stamina to swing a sword all day without losing your breath, then 4 untrained thugs are opponents you can easily handle alone. And a caravan, in the midst of a life-or-death battle, only grows stronger. Arhan began to realize that everything his master had said was true. His body had become as flexible as a dancer's, as if it were responding to the memories embedded within the sword. As the fight progressed, Mary's memories had grown clearer, sharper. Now he understood, if only a little, what it had been like for her to fight against the world. Was this what his master meant? That he could grow stronger the more he understood his opponent? Was this the true power of digestion? At his silence, Liam spoke again. My young descendant, when it comes to the sword I never lie. And I promise you this, your days ahead will be painful. A series of trials so harsh that you will wish for death itself. So much so that the hardship you face today will feel like a blessing in comparison. Even after hearing that, will you still walk this path? Arhan answered without hesitation, his voice filled with resolve. If it means I can point my sword at that man Carlos's throat, I will walk it, no matter how cruel the path may be, master. The next day, during training, Arhan began to wonder if he had made the right decision by speaking so boldly. As he climbed a cliff slanted at a 90-degree angle, he asked Liam whether this was truly the right way. One misstep, and not a single bone of his would ever be found. Liam glanced at him and said, Where did the look in your eyes from last night go? Has your doubt returned? Arhan was in no position to answer. Liam continued, Then again, that is one of your strengths. You've always been that way since you were young. We will need to work on that trait someday. But first, I will answer your question. The path of a swordsman is broadly divided into 5 stages. At the beginning stands the sword beginner. Among them, those with talent reach the realm of the sword walker. Those who establish themselves as pillars of the battlefield become sword runners. The heroes who can turn the tide of battle alone are sword experts. And reigning above all others, revered almost as gods themselves, are those who achieve the mind sword, the sword masters. Answer me, young descendant. Among these, where do you think you belong? Though he was clinging to life, Arhan turned toward Liam and replied, I'm sure you want a bold answer, but I know my own level well. The prerequisite to becoming a sword master is wielding mana. And to wield mana, one must have a vessel to store it, a second heart. The formation of a mana heart. But I haven't formed one yet, so I don't believe I even qualify as a beginner. Liam nodded. You are very self-aware. Yes, you have not yet entered the path of the sword. You are a novice among novices. This training exists to guide someone like you onto the path of a beginner, so that you may form a mana heart. As those words sank in, Arhan suddenly started yelling at his master. What? You mean I'm risking my life right now just to form a mana heart? In a place like this, where I could actually die? I don't know how it was in your time, master, but nowadays you can simply drink an alchemist's potion or have a walker-level knight infuse you with mana to awaken your senses and form a mana heart. That's why even noble ladies who only learn swordsmanship for self-defense can do it easily. So why abandon such an easy path? Why do we have to stick to this method? I just don't understand. Liam replied calmly. As you say, forming a mana heart itself is not difficult. It would not be impossible to simply follow the norms. However, the blood of the caravans is imbued with the unyielding power of steel. To wield that power, an equally tough vessel is required. An ordinary human heart will not suffice. The limit one can reach with a human heart is merely the limit of a human. If you truly wish to reach the level of a sword master, there is only one thing you must possess, something that would not be scratched even if it clashed with the world itself. A heart of steel. There is only one way to forge it. You must push your body to the brink of death again and again, until it feels the need to form a mana heart on its own. Even among my descendants, very few have completed this training to the end. That is how painful and terrible the process is. But those who endured it became sword masters. Liam looked at him. How about it, young descendant? Are you feeling a little motivated? Arhan smiled, looking as though he had just drunk a powerful elixir and been filled with boundless energy. More than a little. Liam spoke once more. I do not lie when it comes to the sword, descendant. The mana heart you will create will be different from anyone else in this world. The scene shifted to the eastern village of the Verdi region, Campbell. Several people were gathered, discussing the caravans. Hey, did you hear that rumor? One man said. About the village to the west, caravan. Another replied. Oh, you mean that place where no one's been seen for a year? Why bring up that creepy town? Well, rumors have been spreading lately. There's something in that western village. Something? What is it? How should I know? Whatever it is, it's dangerous. All the ruffians who set foot there have never been heard from again. Some say a monster wave that the Northern Watchers missed swept through the village. Others say necromancers experimenting with forbidden magic are stationed there. There are all kinds of stories, but they all come to the same conclusion. If you don't want to die, never enter the western village. A man sitting at the bar overheard the conversation and quietly set his glass down. As he wiped his mouth, bloodstains were visible on the handkerchief and around his lips. For some reason, he thought that a place where one died simply by entering sounded perfect for him. Since that day, Arhan began clinging to the cliff using only his left hand. At the same time, he continued dealing with the uninvited guests at the mansion. Even on days when he was completely drained, when his muscles screamed in agony from relentless training, when simply lifting his arm felt like an impossible task, he endured it all without missing a single day, giving everything he had. And so, a month passed. If you are wondering whether he managed to form a mana heart through that absurd training, the answer is no, unfortunately, he did not. However, a clear change was taking place. One of those changes was his senses growing increasingly sharp. Not only his 5 senses, but also his judgment and concentration in handling situations had improved to a level incomparable to before. And every time he wielded the needle, when he focused on a single point, there were brief moments where it felt as though time itself, except for him, had stopped. The difference between the Arhan of the past and the Arhan of now came down to a single factor: he could feel mana. To achieve this without having formed a mana heart, or even becoming a sword beginner, was astonishing. Of course, it was likely made possible by the power of the needle, but it was remarkable nonetheless. Sitting beneath the tree, Arhan tried to calm his mind and meditate. Amid the countless thoughts swirling in his head, a question surfaced, one he wanted to ask his master. "Master," Arhan said, "what kind of power will I possess when I reach the next level?" Liam replied, "If something so trivial impresses you, then you still have a long way to go before you can shed the title of novice. Still, I will answer you. Once you form a mana heart, become a sword beginner, and truly understand the depth of that power, only then will you stand on equal footing with the owner of the needle. And if you take one step further, by drawing upon the path emitted from the mana heart, you will be able to enhance your physical abilities and construct a domain for both offense and defense. That is the realm of superhumans. The world calls it the level of a sword walker. Though it is the very next stage after a beginner, you will realize just how vast the difference between the two truly is the moment you face it. Does that answer your question?" Arhan understood every word his master spoke. Still, one more question remained. "In that case," Arhan said, "may I ask one more thing?" Liam nodded. "If my sensing is correct, the man who entered this territory a while ago and settled here, is he a sword walker?" "That's right," Liam answered. "He exists on a completely different level from all the rabble you've dealt with so far. In your current state, if you were to face him, you wouldn't last even a second." For now, Arhan said he planned to observe the situation and prepare for the worst. He had no other choice. Liam suggested that he could abandon the territory and avoid a battle he could not win. But for Arhan, that was never an option. No matter how long it had been left to decay, now desolate beyond recognition, it was the only place that held everyone's memories. Liam looked at him with a trace of apology and said that in this Iron Kingdom, only the strong were allowed to seek answers. Even Arhan's simple wish was nothing more than greed, a luxury he could not yet afford. He told him to use the emotions he felt now as the driving force to obtain what he desired. To feed on the trial before him and become as hard as steel, so that no one would ever dare to laugh at his words again. But things do not always go as planned. The strange man finally appeared before Arhan and issued his challenge. "Don't even think about running," he said. "If you turn your back on me, I'll cut you down on the spot." And just like that, an unexpected trial had arrived. When the mysterious man set foot in the territory, observing him became a new part of Arhan's daily routine. Through this, Arhan came to several clear conclusions. Even though the village was filled with empty houses, as if he believed each one still had an owner, the man never touched so much as a single trinket. He lived a simple life, using only the belongings he had brought with him. If he had any notable habits, it was that he often lost himself in thought while watching the sunset, or else spent his time praying. From this, Arhan reached a conclusion: the man was a knight. Liam agreed. He explained that the man was a swordsman who had reached the level of a sword walker. Yet despite his strength, he strictly adhered to rules and manners even when no one was watching. People so rigid and principled were rare, unless they were knights. In that case, Arhan said, he might not be a bad first neighbor. Knights uphold honor and pursue justice. They're far better than the intruders we've faced so far. Liam corrected him immediately. It is true that they pursue honor, but calling them righteous is misleading. Honor is, by nature, highly subjective. You cannot assume that the honor they uphold is good for everyone. A knight's honor is defined by the one they swear loyalty to, the one who pays them. In the end, it is decided by the will of their employer. Let me teach you again what a knight truly is, Liam continued. A knight is merely a swordsman who uses honor as a pretext to exercise violence. An executioner who carries out efficient killings using sword techniques passed down through generations. And because they're clad in expensive equipment, they're simply enemies who are annoyingly difficult to kill. Don't be blinded by the hollow ring of the word knight. Observe and judge the essence of your target itself. Doubt, Liam said quietly. Because that is the precious talent you possess. Arhan was taken aback. Doubt his talent? Liam explained. You've been like this since you were a child. Even while listening to the legends of the Caravan family your father told you, you were constantly digging for the truth beneath them. In moments when you could have endangered yourself by being intoxicated with power, you survived because you eliminated variables through morbid sensitivity and observation. Doubt is a refusal to be swayed by what you simply see or hear. It is the attitude of exhausting every method, every thought to reach the truth. Those who cannot doubt can never surpass their limits. Never lose that trait. That is your talent for the sword. Arhan gained a new perspective on doubt, and thanked his master for the invaluable lesson. Still, despite everything he had learned, he never lowered his guard around the strange man. After observing him for a long time and concluding that he likely would not turn into an intruder, Arhan finally approached him, slowly and cautiously. His intention was simple, to invite him to become a neighbor. But the man suddenly pointed his sword at Arhan. I know you've been watching me this entire time, he said. If you have something to say, say it now. Don't even think about running, he said. If you turn your back on me, I'll cut you down on the spot. Arhan hadn't expected things to unfold like this. A memory surfaced. The sewing gypsy, an alias more widely known than she had ever expected. Because of it, she received recruitment offers from renowned mercenary groups, and just as often attracted thugs who came after her reputation. During those days, a certain thought had taken root in her mind. Perhaps I've gone beyond being a female mercenary with a peculiar sword. Perhaps I've truly become a strong swordsman. The moment that shattered that arrogance arrived soon after. She encountered a knight, and was defeated without effort. They call you the sewing gypsy, don't they? The knight had said. Indeed, a fitting nickname for such a feeble sword. It seems you were proud of your skills. Don't flatter yourself, you singed stray. You're nothing but a lowly mercenary. If you weren't a woman, you'd be no different from a bug-eyed crush on the spot. The only reason you're alive today is because of the rules of the Red Hawk Knights. We never take the lives of women or children. Be grateful for our chivalry for the rest of your life. That day, she felt an immeasurable wall between herself and that man. That wall was called a knight. Later, she learned that the realm he had reached was known as Swordwalker. Arhan realized something then. Mary in that memory was far stronger than he was now. And yet, she had been defeated without even being able to resist. The sense of death he felt now was overwhelming, far beyond what he had felt while clinging to the cliff. Was that why his heart was pounding so violently? But it wasn't fear alone. It was growing stronger. He began to see it, the realm of superhumans, attainable only from the level of Swordwalker and above. Mana spread outside the body like blood vessels, reinforcing both offense and defense with will itself. Arhan was more stunned by the changes within his own body than by the man standing before him. The stranger spoke again. What is your reason for watching me? You're the one from the rumors, aren't you? The one who attacks visitors here. If you don't give me a valid explanation, I'll have no choice but to treat you as an enemy. Answer me. Arhan raised his own sword and replied. It was to determine whether you were a guest, or an intruder. The man frowned. That's vague. Be specific. Arhan took a breath. I was born and raised here. But a year ago, while I was away from the territory, my neighbors vanished as if a necromancer had unleashed a beast upon the land. The village was left in ruins. Since then, barbarians and vagrants have repeatedly invaded this place, threatening both the territory and my life. I dealt with them all myself. But unlike them, you are far stronger, strong enough that I was certain I'd die if I approached you carelessly. That's why I watched you. To judge whether you were an intruder or a guest. If you were the latter, I intended to invite you to become a neighbor. If you were the former, I would have had to devise other plans for this land. The stranger narrowed his eyes. You intend to oppose me? Even knowing the difference in our strength? This land holds a lifetime of my memories, Arhan replied. It's too precious to abandon and flee from. Something shifted in the man's gaze. A precious place. You've been through something difficult, haven't you, young master? I understand. Then it's only fair that I state my position as well, he continued. If we are to be neighbors, we must understand one another. Lower your guard and sheath your sword. I will do the same and tell you my story. Come now. Arhan recalled his master's words. There is only one way to forge a heart of steel. You must push yourself endlessly to the brink of death, until your body itself begins to crave a mana heart. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Arhan said, but I can't do that. I don't fully trust you yet, and I need this sword, if only for a little defense. The man looked at him calmly. You should know that if I truly intended to harm you, that sword would be meaningless. But in a situation where both of us have drawn our weapons, being the first to sheath one's sword would stain a knight's honor. I must uphold my honor. I understand, Arhan replied. But I can't back down either. Kneeling in fear and surrendering before a fight was something he had sworn never to do again. The man carefully observed Arhan. What is this boy? He thought. He looks delicate enough to pass for a girl. Yet his entire body bears the marks of enduring grueling training. Though his frame seems flimsy, his balance is impeccable. However, he hasn't learned proper swordsmanship. An unorthodox style, one that pours everything into the first strike. Even with a generous estimate, he hasn't moved beyond the level of a beginner. In other words, he poses not even the slightest threat to me. The boy must know this himself. And yet, what is it with those eyes? Realizing that a half-hearted response would not suffice, the man decided to strike Arhan's wrist and disarm him, the best way to end this without injuring him. He charged forward, aiming for Arhan's arm. But his sword was deflected. He froze in shock. Arhan, who had not even reached the level of a beginner, had blocked his strike. And that wasn't all. In a single breath from Arhan, the surrounding mana surged like crashing waves. Had it formed within him in that very instant? That abnormal mana heart. Even so, deflecting an enemy's sword should have been impossible. Was it because of the mana heart he possessed? A normal mana heart was typically soft and flexible, but Arhan's was astonishingly rigid and solid, just like steel. The stranger could not be certain of everything, but one thing was clear. His sword was coming. And it carried Arhan's entire being, a strike staked on his very life. From Arhan's perspective, blocking the knight's sword had not been due to skill. It had been nothing more than a fluke. From the beginning, the knight had no intention of harming him. He had aimed for the wrist, avoiding vital points, and the force behind the strike had been minimal. That was the only reason it was possible. Arhan had predicted the trajectory and thrust the tip of the needle into that narrow gap to intercept the blow. The price for that miracle, however, was immense. It felt like colliding head-on with a speeding carriage. Agony surged through his body, as if every bone had shattered at once. The gap in power was truly despairing. And yet the thing he had longed for so desperately had finally awakened. The heart of steel. Even so, he was still only a beginner. Arhan's thrust would never reach the knight. Then there was only one option left. He had to carve a path of his own, as one who possessed both the heart of steel and the needle, using Mary's memories as a stepping stone. That day, she had collapsed before the overwhelming wall of a sword walker. As she faced that insurmountable limit head-on, the moment her body trembled with fear, the first thing that surfaced in her mind was Hiko's voice. Don't forget, Mary. Most swordsmen see a wall and call it an insurmountable limit. But that is nothing more than an excuse for those who lack the courage to clash and choose to settle. Walls exist solely to be overcome. The fear you feel before it is simply the fate of one who wields a sword, nothing more than a stepping stone toward greater heights. Don't look away. Stand tall and face it head-on. You will be cut down and torn apart miserably, time and time again. You will fall to your knees in helplessness. But if you don't give up, if you continue to strike against it, your sword will surely surpass that wall. So believe in yourself. That's all there is to it. Even this stranger knew about the wall, the place where countless swordsmen trembled, and ultimately gave up. But Arhan was not among them. He intended to clash against it head-on. To many, such resistance would seem like nothing more than youthful recklessness. Yet Arhan believed that was precisely why it was a trial he had to face. The path did not need to be perfect. Even if it was clumsy and incomplete, as long as there was even the smallest possibility of reaching the destination, that alone was enough. Arhan carefully observed the knight. He watched which muscles the knight put strength into, how he controlled his breathing, and what trajectory his blade intended to carve through the air. Every clue was gathered. Everything unnecessary was discarded. Piece by piece, he constructed a single path forward, one that could lead him to that distant place. Liam watched his descendant with pride. To advance without yielding before adversity, that was what it meant to be a caravan. Arhan willingly threw himself into the trial and charged forward. He was afraid. Memories surged within him, the moment he became the sole survivor amid blazing flames, the realization that the tragedy which had taken everything from him was only the beginning, the days when he could not even bear to look at himself in a mirror, days when even breathing felt unbearably heavy. Over those years, she had come to understand something crucial. What she truly needed to fear was not the fire itself, but the weakness within her, the part that only knew how to run away. Her daily life, her family, her entire world had been swallowed by flames, leaving nothing behind. Her future had been stolen. If someone asked whether she had reached enlightenment, the answer would be simple. She was no longer afraid. Not of fire. Not even of a world that might crush him. Arhan and the knight struck at the same instant. Their swords collided with violent force. In that moment, Arhan's blade shattered. Fragments scattered through the air as the broken sword fell to the ground. When it struck the earth, the scene drifted quietly into the past. Mary stood beneath the moonlight, tears streaming down her face as thoughts of Hekal filled her heart. She wondered whether he had finally found peace beyond this world. Following his guidance, she had left the orphanage and stepped into the wider world, carrying his teachings and the single needle he had placed in her hand. She had longed for a life of freedom, wandering as he once had. Even now, she was unsure whether she could truly say she had lived such a life. The world was filled with monsters far stronger than she was. Countless towering walls had blocked her path, walls that spirit and determination alone could never overcome. Yet there was one thing she knew to be true. Until the very end of her life, she had never once turned away from any wall that stood before her. If her master's beliefs were true, then someday they would meet again within the embrace of flames. And when that day came, just as he once had for her, she would tell him her story in return. That story would likely begin with a single realization: she was no longer afraid of fire. As that thought settled in her heart, Mary was struck by a vivid illusion. She saw Hekal standing beside her, as though he had never left. Overwhelmed, she ran toward him and collapsed into his arms, crying just as she had when she was a child. Needle digestion complete. Arhan lay sprawled on the ground. His gaze was unfocused, scattered thoughts drifting through his fading consciousness. He thought, did I lose consciousness? Seeing the robe, Arhan recognized it immediately. It belonged to the knight. With that realization came a painful truth. In the end, he had failed to break through his limits. The result of the battle was undeniable. Sitting silently with the remnants of his shattered sword in his hands, disappointment weighed heavily upon him. Then his master, Liam, addressed him gently, calling him his young descendant, not to grieve. It was a struggle worthy of the caravan name. Moreover, along with the defeat, haven't you noticed it yourself? You've completely digested the needle. Arhan started recognizing the changes in his body. I can feel that my muscles have become incomparably more flexible than before. Also, my senses have sharpened like those of a wild beast. It feels as if I have become a veteran mercenary who has lived their whole life on the battlefield. I think I now understand the master's intention in choosing this sword. It is not just for its strength and technique, but he wanted to show me her life itself. The will that never gives up, even in the face of immense trials, that indomitable spirit. Arhan thought, would it hurt to tell me things like this from the start? The knight approached quietly and remarked that Arhan had finally come to his senses. He explained that he had gone to fetch water and admitted that a misunderstanding still lingered between them, something that needed to be resolved. Arhin tightened his grip on his sword, ready to strike at once. But his master intervened, reassuring him that there was no need for such caution. That man is not the kind to cause you harm. Arhin was still suspicious about the situation. The knight said he already knew about what the young master went through, so it is not easy to lower your guard. Then if I were to tell my story would be able to lower your guard first, why I came all the way here, and why I can't be a threat to you, young master. Arhin asked what he was doing right now. The knight introduced himself. My name is Patel. A retired knight, a wanderer with nowhere to go. A terminally ill patient on the verge of death. Even high priests who have studied medicine all their lives have affirmed it, that I only have a month left to live. I am nothing more than a mere sick man waiting for my death. So will you listen to me for a moment, young master? After a brief commotion had settled, we had a conversation regrettably unlike his swordsmanship. Sir Petals was not very eloquent. He often repeated himself, and poured out his story and emotions incoherently. It wasn't smooth communication, but to me that clumsiness felt like unadorned sincerity. Summarizing what I learned about Sir Patel, it is as follows. After being diagnosed with a terminal illness, he left the knighthood to which he was loyal, and became a knight who came looking for a place to die. Sir Patel said that the reason he left the order was nothing grand, he just didn't want to be a burden while ending his breathless life. For his final moments, he simply wished to quietly spend his time on his own terms. Arhin remained silent, grief weighing heavily on his chest. Liam finally spoke, confirming that Patel was not lying. Even now, illness was eating away at his mana heart like a slow poison. Once it encroaches upon the mana heart and reaches it, his life will end. Patel extended his hand toward Arhin. Gently, he asked whether that was enough for him to be accepted as a neighbor. Arhin did not answer immediately. After a moment, he stood and spoke quietly. He said that telling such a story could not have been easy. He thanked Patel for his honesty and introduced himself. His name was Arhin. I'm the last resident of this land, which has lost its name and been forgotten. Welcome to the neighborhood, Sir Patel. A quiet bond was formed between them. From a distance, Liam watched the exchange with a satisfied smile. He observed the mana heart, and understood it was time for the next step. In his mind, one destination stood above all others, a place unlike any other in the world. Days later, Arhin and his master traveled together in a horse-drawn carriage. Arhin finally voiced his confusion. Now that I've ascended to sword beginner, I thought you might instruct me in swordsmanship directly. But why are we traveling so far so suddenly? And thanks to Sir Patel, I don't have to worry about intruders disrupting the mansion, but is there a need to travel this far? His master clicked his tongue and said, You still haven't escaped the mindset of an ordinary person. How many times must I tell you before you understand, you foolish descendant? We Carvens are different from anyone else in the world and special. As long as the blood of steel flows in your body, rather than conventional swordsmanship training, endless struggle that beats your body to its limit, and the digestion of new swords are the priority for your growth. Our current destination is the perfect place to look for such growth. A place where, regardless of status or origin, only those who covet flesh-splattering strife gather. A stage for life-staking duels. In my era, that place was given the name, the arena. As the scene shifted, a colossal arena appeared. Inside, battles raged without pause. Blades clashed violently, sparks scattering through the air as warriors exchanged strikes. The crowd roared wildly, intoxicated by violence and anticipation. Firma, the city of steel. As one of the cities symbolizing the Iron Kingdom, metallurgy has developed greatly here, so it's no exaggeration to say that every piece of equipment in the Iron Kingdom is made here, which would make it the holy land of the sword. But long before all that, the true driving force that revitalized Firma was something else, and that something now stood before them, the arena. Liam said the arena's name had changed with time, but the feeling remained. Above all, this heat radiating even outside the stadium, it hasn't changed one bit. Truly diverse struggles took place here. Beast duels to determine the strongest beast, wild duels pitting humans against beasts, and even species duels to decide superiority between different traces. All were fierce duels, but the most violent of them all was the combat duel. Gladiators possessing various personalities and techniques would roll in the dirt and fight like beasts, where the victor took the loser's life, claiming everything left behind as spoils of war. It was truly a frenzied fight to the death. Spectators roared drunkenly, throwing gold coins into the sand as they gambled and cheered. A city of madness built upon the deep pools of blood they spilled. That is exactly Firma is. Liam seemed proud as he spoke of it. His voice carried excitement, almost nostalgia. Arhan, however, felt something else. Confusion. If what the old man said was true, then there was no better place to grow stronger. If he defeated gladiators and consumed their weapons, he could increase his power more quickly than anywhere else. Liam glanced at him and called Arhan simple-minded. If mindless devouring truly worked, he would have already forced Arhan to consume every weapon in the junk heaps, along with the heirlooms foolish intruders had left behind. Blind consumption would jumble memories of the sword and destroy oneself. The sword must not control the wielder. The wielder must control the sword. Until Arhan could open his own eyes, he would only consume what his master allowed. Arhan felt a flicker of fear. He did not fully understand what those eyes meant, but he understood the warning. Liam shook his hands once and said that it was time. 3 hours later, they stood inside the entrance hall. A long line of fighters stretched toward a counter where a receptionist greeted each person with a bright and playful smile. When it was Arhan's turn, she asked if it was his first time participating. She told him to register and receive a medal. Without it, entry was impossible. Arhan blinked. A medal? He felt the stares from the people behind him. He slowly turned toward his master and repeated the word under his breath. The old man's face tightened. Sweat formed on his temple. He muttered that such a thing had not existed in his time. Arhan felt disbelief wash over him. This old man had dragged him all the way here, proudly speaking of the arena's glorious past. And yet he did not even know the present rules. The receptionist gently showed a medal in her hand and told Arhan to obtain one and line up again. The medal represented fame and status. Its color showed a fighter's record and strength. It was the arena's unique ranking system. From highest to lowest, the order went black medal, white medal, platinum medal, gold medal, silver medal, and so on. Naturally, a newcomer like him could not receive anything grand. He got bronze. A low rank. A beginner's mark. Anger stirred within him, but it twisted into a thin smile instead. So much had changed. He glanced at his master, his smile sharp, almost mocking. Just hours ago, the old man had spoken of madness and glory of blood and roaring crowds. Now they stood in line like ordinary participants, holding medals like schoolchildren. The difference between past and present felt almost laughable. The master snapped back in frustration, insisting that the atmosphere had not been like this before. His voice carried both anger and wounded pride. In his time, he said, it did not matter who stepped into the arena. A scholar who had never held a knife. Or a northern warrior who had slaughtered 100 men. Once they entered, they were thrown into battle all the same. No ranks. No balance. No protection. Only survival. That was the arena he remembered. Raw and merciless. They began walking toward the inner grounds. Liam muttered to himself, shaking his head at the idea of weight classes. To him, it sounded absurd. Arhan listened quietly before answering. In the end, he said, it was probably about money. No matter how much the Iron Kingdom worshipped strength, if life and death duels continued for centuries without restraint, there would be no gladiators left. And for the crowd that gambled on the matches, a fight with an obvious winner would be dull. Experts fighting experts. Beginners fighting beginners, that makes for a good show. Times had changed. The arena had changed with them. Arhan stopped at a distance and spoke calmly to his master. Because of these changes, he said, the arena had become more than a killing ground. It was now a landmark. People traveled from distant lands just to see it. It had helped Firma grow into a great city. In truth, it was a successful transformation. He added that these days, even if someone lost a duel, they were not usually killed. It was said to be an unspoken rule among gladiators. Of course, that did not mean the loser would walk away unharmed. Their body might not remain whole. The master's face twisted in disbelief. He muttered that it sounded less like a true arena, and more like a cheap tavern show. The more he listened, the more foolish it sounded to him. Yet after a moment, his tone shifted. Perhaps, he admitted reluctantly, this might actually be fortunate for Arhan. Fighting someone on the same level teaches you a different lesson. Until then, it'd be good to look around the smithies. The difference in craftsmanship between Firma and the small workshops near the caravan estate would become obvious. Liam's eyes were fixed on something ahead. What is this? He asked. Arhan frowned, not understanding. When he stepped forward and followed his master's gaze, his breath caught. In the middle of the city square stood a wide, open structure. Weapons were displayed inside it, mounted carefully within frames. Swords, spears, axes, dozens of them. Arhan stared in confusion. Why were weapons placed openly in the street like decorations? His thoughts tangled with uncertainty. A laugh came from behind them. An older man approached with a warm smile, clearly amused by Arhan's confusion. He explained that this place is the Hall of Fame. He introduced himself as Tom, the hall's manager. If they wished, he said politely, he would be happy to explain its purpose. Arhan hesitated briefly and glanced at his master. The old man's eyes were still fixed on the displayed weapons, shining with unusual intensity. At last, Arhan introduced himself and accepted the offer. Tom turned toward the hall and gestured proudly. The weapons displayed here once belonged to gladiators who had achieved great accomplishments in the arena. Each blade had witnessed countless battles. They were old now, worn down with time. Most had lost their ability to function as proper weapons. Yet they were preserved to honor the spirit of those who had fought with them. Arhan nodded slowly, taking in the sight. Tom smiled again and said that if Arhan had any more questions, he would gladly answer them. Serving this place was his small joy as its manager. Before Arhan could speak, Liam told Arhan to ask something specific. Arhan blinked, uncertain. The master's lips curved into a thin, dangerous smile. Ask him if there is a way to possess the swords displayed here. He did not need to explain further. Arhan understood immediately. His eyes widened slightly. A faint purple aura shimmered around the sword, subtle yet unmistakable. Compared to the others, it felt almost alive. Liam said he had found it that would be the next sword Arhan must devour. The scene shifted to the arena. Arhan walked slowly through a corridor, entrance for arena competitors. His thoughts drifted back to earlier that day, to the moment inside the Hall of Fame. Tom, the manager, had smiled calmly when Arhan asked whether there was a way to obtain the swords displayed there. Then he answered without hesitation. Of course, there was a way. Those who proved themselves as gladiators were granted the right to possess one piece of weaponry matching the color of their medal. Every time the rank of the medal rose by one stage, one weapon could be obtained. In simple terms, promotion meant reward. If Arhan were promoted to silver rank, he would be allowed to claim the swords that he laid his eyes on. It was a system built on achievement. Nothing was given freely. The scene returned to the present corridor. Liam said that the hall is a treasure trove. To others, the weapons might look old, worn, and useless. But to Arhan, they were swords with value greater than gold. Liam smiled slightly and added that Arhan now had more reasons to enter the arena, even if it wasn't for training. He had to secure usable swords through promotion. Liam continued if it were up to him, he would simply rob the place and steal them all. But that was impossible. The manager of that hall was no ordinary old man. Arhan had looked confused at that statement. Tom had seemed like a kind, gentle elder. Liam replied calmly that when the gap in strength was too wide, it was difficult even to sense it. That manager, although only half complete, could use mana as armor for absolute defense. He was a sword expert. Arhan had been genuinely shocked. A sword expert. That was the stage just before becoming a sword master. Why would such a superhuman existence work as a simple manager in a hall? The master answered without emotion. Nothing was surprising about it. Usually, those who reached that realm were eccentrics. Then, with a sinister expression, Liam muttered that robbing the hall would have to wait for another day. Arhan had been stunned. The old man truly wants me to commit robbery. Liam then shifted the topic. Even though much of the arena had changed over time, one thing remained the same. Gladiators covered their faces to hide their identities. Status and fame existed outside the arena. Inside those walls, they fought only as gladiators. Arhan did not think it was a bad custom. If he only had to face opponents as a gladiator, not as a person, then he could fight without hesitation. As he reached the final gate before the fighting ring, an old man wearing a hood stood there. He addressed Arhan as a young gladiator he had never seen before and asked what alias he would use in the arena. Arhan hesitated. An alias? The old man explained that no one who stepped into the arena used their real name. The identities they carried outside would only be a burden. As a gladiator, one had to choose the name they were most proud of, the name that would accompany their life within the arena. Arhan fell silent. He thought of his past, to his mother and father. After a moment of reflection, he spoke his chosen name. The old man hummed softly. It was a word he had never heard before. Is it the protagonist of some night novel? But it did not matter. He simply prayed that victory would follow Arhan's first step. The gate opened. Arhan stepped into the arena. The announcer's voice thundered across the stadium. "Young gladiator Liam!" At that call, Arhan raised the mask and covered his face. This was his entrance exam. The bronze-ranked arena was nearly empty. Matches at this level carried little expectation except for petty gamblers. They were nothing more than filler between major fights, a way to pass the time in the evening. Because of that, the stadium was not filled with cheers or applause. It was filled with boos. A few scattered spectators shouted. They complained that they had not come all this way to watch something boring. They demanded the match begin immediately. One of them mocked Arhan directly, calling him weak and telling him to die if he was only going to waste time. The words were harsh. Sharp. Liam commented that this was nothing more than humiliation and contempt reserved for the weak. Indeed, it was scenery fitting for the Iron Kingdom, where the strong ruled. He then asked Arhan whether he was being intimidated by the noise. Arhan tightened his grip on his sword and replied quietly that he was not. Liam nodded. That is the right mindset. Then he reminded Arhan that he had staked his name on this battlefield. Arhan now carried the history and honor of the caravan. All of it rested on him. Arhan listened. His eyes shined blue and steady, he answered firmly. That's the reason why he would definitely win. The announcer shouted. Now, today's third match. Introducing the rookie gladiators who will demonstrate the charm of a shabby fight. He pointed first at Arhan. Name, face, record, nothing to show. A rookie among rookies making his very first appearance in the arena. The greenhorn rookie gladiator, Liam. Then the announcer turned toward the opponent. Since his debut, this man had brutally taken the lives of every gladiator he had faced. In return, he had received both roaring cheers and overflowing boos from the crowd. The rookie with 3 consecutive victories, the giant gladiator, Temur. Temur smiled, clear malice gleaming in his eyes. Finally, the announcer raised his voice once more and declared that this sacred match would be dedicated to the goddess Lepri. Temur let out a mocking laugh. He said the name Liam sounds weak, stupid, and unimpressive, a name that carries no weight. He said it would be a waste to even use his sword against someone like Arhan. Then he leaned in and proposed that Arhan throw away that ridiculous sword, remove his mask, and dance to the rhythm of Temur's clapping. If he did that, Temur promised to show special generosity and spare his slender neck. Arhan spoke finally that he heard that not taking each other's lives was an unspoken rule here. Temur stared at him for a moment, and said so that was why the boy dared to stand there. He believed in unspoken rules. Tyr's expression twisted. Did he look like someone who cared about such things? In the Zernia Mountains, where he had been born and raised, men who lost were always killed. That was the law there. That was how strength was proven. He shouted that he had killed all 3 gladiators he had faced before, snapping their necks with his own hands. Why? Because it was the rightful privilege of the winner, and because it was the best entertainment. In his view, Arhan was too insignificant. Whether he snapped his neck or twisted his limbs, he would feel no enjoyment. So Arhan should at least make the fight amusing. He should shake that girl-like body of his and make the audience laugh. That would be the price for his life. Arhan forced his anger down. Suddenly, the announcer shouted with exaggerated excitement. The war of nerves is already intense. Perhaps this will turn into an interesting spectacle. After all, both gladiators were now ordered to take their positions. The match would begin immediately. They stepped back and faced each other properly. Arhan said he also had a proposal. He pointed his sword straight at Temur. If you take back what you said about my name, I will let you die comfortably. His voice trembling and his body was shivering as if he is trying to act weak. Temur blinked. Then he laughed even louder than before. The small crowd joined him, mocking Arhan's bold words. They shouted that the young master was showing amazing bravery. Maybe he had read too many cheap night novels. They asked who Liam even was. One cruel voice said it was the name of the boy's father, who had died first. Temur smirked. If the atmosphere gets this heated, he said, it'll be hard for me to go easy on you. He slowly adjusted his helmet, still grinning. If you just listen obediently, even now, he never finished the sentence. In an instant Arhan moved. The blade flashed once in a clean arc. 2 fingers flew from Temur's hand before anyone understood what had happened. They fell to the ground. Blood sprayed across the sand. Shock filled Temer's eyes as he stared at his injured hand. Arhan stood before him, sword steady. His voice was cold. "I'll say it one more time. Apologize for insulting my name, if you want to die comfortably." Temer's rage swallowed him whole. He screamed at Arhan, his voice breaking as he called him a bastard. Then he lunged forward at full speed, and he swung his sword with murderous intent. Arhan leapt backward at the exact moment the blade descended. Temer tightened his grip, which gave him so much pain. The crowd gasped. This was not the one-sided display they had expected. Sweat rolled down Temer's face. Just moments ago, the boy had seemed like a trembling amateur. So how was he moving like this now? A cold realization formed in his mind. Had he been pretending earlier? Arhan's voice reached him, low and cold. "Would this be considered cowardly?" he asked calmly. "Just like you said earlier. This isn't child's play." The words cut deeper than mockery. Temer's teeth ground together. His eyes flared red again as he rushed forward in another furious assault. He shouted that he would kill him. Arhan tightened his grip on his sword. Temer attacked in a storm of steel. Each swing is heavy and fast. Yet Arhan slipped through every strike with minimal movement. Each dodge was nothing more than a small shift, a slight lean, a step measured by inches. Temer's blade passed by him again and again by the thinnest margin. Temer felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Who was this boy? In that moment, Arhan felt like a silent white serpent coiling around him, watching, waiting. What exactly was he fighting? Then Arhan moved. In a sudden burst, he closed the distance. His sword flashed 3 times. 3 deep wounds opened across Temer's leg. Temer screamed as pain tore through him. Desperate, he slashed wildly in return. But Arhan had already jumped backward. The counterattack struck nothing. Arhan landed lightly. His eyes were cold and focused. Temer's injured leg finally gave way. He dropped to one knee. His sword slipped from his grasp and fell beside him. He tried to stand, straining his muscles. But his body no longer obeyed. Strength drained from him. Arhan stepped closer. "I'll make you the offer again." Temer lifted his head weakly and listened. "Take off that ridiculous helmet. Dance to the rhythm of my clapping. Then I'll spare that useless head of yours." The announcer stared in disbelief. Liam, watching from a distance, remained silent. Temer gathered what little strength he had and forced himself into a sitting position. "I accept the offer," he said weakly. He asked for a moment to breathe, just a few seconds. His voice trembled. Then his hands slowly reached toward his fallen sword. In the next instant a blade pierced through his hand and nailed it to the ground. Arhan warned him to choose his next move carefully because there would be no more offers. Temer finally understood. He was fighting a battle he had already lost. His hands trembled as he removed his helmet. Gathering the last of his strength, he apologized for insulting Arhan's name. He begged for his life. The arena erupted. Spectators shouted in excitement. They called the rookie amazing, the best bronze fighter they had seen in a long time. Some celebrated winning their bets. Others swore they would wager on him again. They began shouting his name. "Liam! Liam!" The chant echoed across the arena. Arhan stood tall at the center of the arena as his name echoed around him. Tom watched from the stands with a small smile. From the very beginning, he had sensed something extraordinary in the boy. To receive such enthusiastic cheers after the very first match was a sign of great promise. Yet his gaze soon drifted into the distance. In this arena, too much attention could become poison. 2 nobles also observed the match, quietly discussing Arhan among themselves as the scene faded. A few days later, Arhan looked stunned. He asked the receptionist to repeat what she had just said. She smiled and explained that the arena had evaluated his performance very positively, though it was somewhat unusual. They wished to make a proposal fitting his achievements. A silver promotion match. Would Gladiator Liam be willing to accept the challenge? The words struck him deeply. A real silver promotion match. 2 days had passed since Arhan's debut fight against Temer. In that short time, 3 more matches had taken place. He had won all of them. Now, standing inside the arena office and hearing the offer of a silver promotion match, was this goodwill? A reward for his efficiency? He wanted to believe that. But something felt wrong. The offer seemed too sudden. His master stood nearby, his deep blue eyes fixed on the receptionist. The receptionist, however, continued speaking brightly, as though nothing about this was unusual. The condition for promotion was simple. Arhan only needed to duel against an opponent chosen by the arena. The important thing, she added with a soft laugh, is that you don't even need to fight very hard. Only 3 minutes. If he could simply endure for 3 minutes after the match began, victory would be declared in his favor. That was all. Her eyes sparkled as she explained that she did not even need to mention how unusual such an opportunity was. Once he reached silver rank, he would face far stronger opponents than the bronze fighters he had encountered so far. His match fees would increase accordingly. Higher status, greater rewards, all earned in just 3 minutes. She asked if he understood what a tremendous opportunity this was. Before Arhan could respond, Liam spoke. Rookie stomping. An old tradition from the days when the arena had been nothing more than a crude fighting pit. It was a method used to weed out clever rookie fighters who relied on efficiency rather than flashy violence. A spectacle designed for a particular type of audience. His tone hardened. The arena would lure a promising rookie with the promise of promotion. Then they would pit him against a powerful opponent he had no chance of defeating. The crowd would watch as the rookie's sword broke. They would enjoy seeing him struggle, humiliated, and toyed with. It was not a promotion match. It was an exhibition. An execution in all but name. If Arhan did not wish to be disgraced, Liam advised him to refuse. A proper chance for promotion would come soon enough. Then Liam turned directly to him. What will you do? Arhan spoke calmly. Isn't the answer obvious? Then he turned to the receptionist and accepted the offer. He said he would gladly face whoever the opponent was. Guys, finally our MC's growth arc is starting. 2 days later, the arena notified him of the opponent's identity. The alias was the Black Bride. The fighter was a graduate of a prestigious academy, undefeated in the silver rank, and a powerhouse sword walker. The academy in question was known as the premier institution for those born with natural talent for the sword. Simply possessing its diploma granted one the rank of knight, a title reserved for the elite. In other words, it means this opponent is overwhelming in every aspect compared to Arhan. Arhan walked along the stone path outside the arena. He said he had investigated the Black Bride. The name carried a dark reputation. Not only had that fighter displayed overwhelming skill in every match, but every opponent had been left unable to recover. Liam let out a short laugh. The arena officials have truly made up their minds this time, he said. If they had prepared this thoroughly, even surviving 3 minutes would not be easy. His tone shifted as he analyzed the situation calmly. What do people call this kind of situation these days? He paused before mocking lightly. They'd probably say you're screwed. Anger flickered across Arhan's face. Is it really that bad? He asked quietly. Liam answered without hesitation. The Black Bride was probably not stronger than Patel. Even if that sick man was frail, he was still a powerhouse who had reached the peak among sword walkers. But there was one clear difference between then and now. Patel had used swordsmanship tailored to Arhan's level. To preserve his honor, he had shown restraint. You could not expect such mercy from the Black Bride. Arhan responded with quiet sarcasm. Thank you for opening my eyes to the terrible reality awaiting me. But inside, his thoughts remained steady. His master never lied about swords. If the old man warned him, the threat was real. Still, Arhan possessed the steel heart of a man. He also carried Mary's memories. A variable no one else knew about. If all he needed to do was endure for 3 minutes, then he had a chance. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted. Soft footsteps echoed behind him. Arhan had not sensed it at all. A figure slowly removed a hood. A calm voice spoke. The little gladiator. Liam. That's you, right? It was a woman. Shock spread through Arhan's body. Even now, he could not sense her presence. He turned slowly to face her. Pitch black hair flowed down her back. The sword at her side had the distinct shape favored by warriors of the East. His mind connected the pieces instantly. The Black Bride. He did not know why she had come to him. But there was no reason to reveal his identity so easily. He met her gaze calmly. You must be mistaken, he said. I don't know any little gladiator named Liam. She stared at him in silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she sighed softly. You're making this troublesome. Her hand moved to her sword. Steel slid from the scabbard. Arhan's eyes widened. Instinct took over. His hand shot toward his own weapon, but before he could draw it fully, cold metal touched his neck. Her blade had reached him first. He had barely managed to grip his hilt. The difference in speed was overwhelming. In the next second, she withdrew the sword and returned it to its scabbard as if nothing had happened. She said from his split-second reaction, and that needle-like sword, he could not deceive her. There was no need to stay on guard. She had not come to kill him. She had come to give a proposal. Arhan frowned. What kind of proposal? Her answer was simple. Forfeit the match. His expression darkened immediately. She continued calmly, don't make a foolish decision, don't force me to ruin your future. Then she turned to leave. But before she could walk away, Arhan spoke again. What if I still participate? What will you do then? She stopped slowly. She looked back. If you choose that path, you'll pay the price. Later, Tom stood alone inside the Hall of Fame, gazing at the rows of weapons displayed. A faint smile touched his lips as he sensed someone approaching. A welcome guest, he said warmly. What brings young Master Arhan here at such an hour? Arhan bowed slightly. He apologized for arriving so late and without notice. He knew it was shameless to ask such a thing. But when he raised his eyes, they shone with firm resolve. He asked if he could take a sword from the hall with him. The memory replayed clearly in Arhan's mind. He had asked the Black Bride what she would do if he still chose to participate. She had turned back slowly, her red eyes cold and steady. You'll pay the price. There would be no mercy for an enemy faced with a sword in hand. He should choose wisely. Then she had walked away without another word. Now Arhan stood alone on the empty road. Liam said she's a talent too good for this era. Most swordsmen eventually reached the wall known as Swordwalker. Their lives as warriors ended at that limit. But for that girl, it would not even be an obstacle. If fortune favored her even slightly, she might soon spread her wings and step into the next realm entirely. She is a genius. Arhan listened quietly. His master was strict and unforgiving when it came to swords. For him to praise someone so highly meant the evaluation was sincere. The gap between Arhan and her was real. For him, it was a distant distance. He lifted his head, his eyes steady. Giving up was not an option. The words were not loud, but they were firm. His master watched him and smiled faintly, and said, time isn't waiting for you, let's hurry along to find the second sword. The scene shifted back to the present. Arhan now stood inside the Hall of Fame, facing Tom. Tom stiffened in shock. Sweat formed on his brow. Taking a sword from this hall was not a small request. Tom, however, quickly understood. He asked if the request was related to the promotion match against the Black Bride. Arhan's eyes widened slightly. So he already knew. Tom explained that the news was spreading everywhere. A match between two promising gladiators naturally attracted attention. To a young fighter who had only just appeared in the arena, it seemed the organizers had played a rather cruel trick. Tom gently advised him to reconsider the promotion match. Then he began to speak about the Black Bride in detail. She hailed from Yongwon on the eastern continent, a land where supreme martial talent overflowed. She had graduated at the top of her class from Temple, one of the Iron Kingdom's 3 great academies. That alone proved her ability. And here in the arena, she had already overwhelmed countless gladiators without defeat. She was a genius in both name and reality. Tom did not deny Arhan's own qualities. He acknowledged that Arhan also possessed excellent potential. But facing a raging wave too early would only result in being swallowed by it. If Arhan gained more experience through some more matches and challenged her after building enough strength to endure such a torrent, he could display an even more splendid fight. Tom assured him of that. Arhan's expression darkened slightly, yet his eyes did not waver. He thanked Tom sincerely for the advice. However, he said he still intended to face the match. He admitted that because he could not measure the height of that wave, his body trembled. He would not deny it, but as one who prayed to the goddess Lepri, avoiding combat out of fear would betray his gladiator's heart. That was why he had come. Despite the shame, he wished to borrow courage from this hall. He wanted to step into tomorrow's match carrying the will of the gladiators who had fought before him. If he survived, he would be promoted and gain the right to obtain a souvenir from this place. In that case, there would be no problem. And if he died, Tom could simply retrieve the sword afterward. That would cause no trouble either. He promised he would not throw a childish tantrum. If Tom felt even the slightest discomfort with this request, he would accept refusal without complaint. His gaze lowered slightly. It is only greed, he admitted quietly. The desire to grasp even a handful of courage, nothing more. Tom looked at Arhan for a long moment. According to the rules, taking a weapon from the Hall of Fame was absolutely forbidden. After a long pause, he spoke. As the guardian of this hall, he could not ignore the sincerity of someone more gladiator-like than anyone else standing before him. So he would grant the request. Arhan lifted his head in surprise. He asked if Tom was truly certain. If trouble arose because of him, Tom interrupted with a warm smile. Despite appearances, he held considerable authority within the arena. Granting this much courage was within his power. His eyes grew moist as he laughed softly. Seeing such a wonderful gladiator after so long had stirred his emotions. Old age had made him sentimental. Arhan bowed deeply. He thanked Tom again and again. Behind him, his master watched and let out a short laugh. He remarked that Arhan seemed to possess more talent for acting than for swordsmanship. If he had chosen the stage instead, he might have succeeded long ago. With this, the conditions were met. Now all that remained was to digest the power of that sword. The next day arrived. Night fell. The arena roared with life. More spectators filled the seats than ever before. The little gladiator versus the Black Bride anticipation crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. At the center of the arena stood the Black Bride. Her thoughts drifted back to a conversation from several days earlier. She had stood before the receptionist, listening as the name of her next opponent was revealed. The little gladiator, she had asked coldly if they truly wanted her to trample someone who was merely a beginner with the sword. The receptionist had smiled brightly and confirmed it. Not only that, the planners requested that she cut off one of his arms or legs. It would make a fine spectacle for the audience. The Black Bride's voice had turned icy. Did they truly believe she would accept such a proposal? The receptionist quickly said that they understood the request was unpleasant. That was precisely why they were prepared to offer something in return, something from storage. The dragon sword of the eastern continent. The name struck her like thunder. Her eyes widened despite herself. The receptionist added quietly that the blade carried great meaning for swordsmen of the East. They had heard that it was one of the reasons the Black Bride continued fighting as a gladiator. Her expression darkened. Her hand tightened around her sword. The receptionist smiled thinly. She would take that silence as acceptance. They hoped for a good match. The memory faded. The Black Bride stood within the arena. It had been a proposal she could not refuse. Not as a gladiator, but as a human being, she had given the boy a warning that had been the only mercy she could offer. Footsteps approached. She looked up. Her eyes widened slightly, despite the warning. He had come. The little gladiator stood before her, sword in hand. Her crimson eyes glowed as she drew her blade from its scabbard. She had given him enough warnings. Whatever happened from this moment onward would be his responsibility. Then something changed, the air shifted, the arena seemed to drown in an invisible tide. The Black Bride suddenly felt as though she were standing ankle-deep in a pool of blood. What is this terrible smell of blood? Was it coming from that boy? Arhan stood opposite her. His face was shadowed. He was a resident of the Free City crowd, one who had willingly stained himself with blood to reclaim freedom. His aura surged wider and deeper. The color darkened. Slowly turning into a deep purple, it settled around him like a living thing. Crowd, it was a land that had once split from the ancient republic, eventually becoming one of the 6 free cities. At one point in history, it was said to be a paradise, and was a land renowned for its beauty. But how history recorded this land is meaningless. We cannot live in the past. In the present day, Crowd is a place where freedom and hope have vanished. Here, people are enslaved by the elite, existing only to fulfill the desires of those in power. It has become nothing more than a terrible land. The beginning of this deep shadow started with corruption among the nobles. They pursued luxuries that could never satisfy their endless greed. Blinded by their desires, they sold the city's territories to foreign powers, the Golden Empire. Eventually, they even used the citizens' human rights as collateral to borrow massive amounts of gold coins from the Red Bank. As a result, the value of human life in Crowd fell to something vile and insignificant. Citizens were reduced to little more than slaves. Faced with this reality, I was filled with questions. My father was beaten to death while begging tourists for food. My mother started selling her body so her children would not starve. My sister died from a fever simply because we lacked a few copper coins. Why were we forced to live our lives like this? I found the answer in an unexpected place. It was in front of a guillotine during a public execution in the city of Crowd. The man being executed had been tormented by false accusations and unbearable slander. Unable to endure the suffering any longer, he chose to resist. The bloodshed that followed shook not only the city of Crowd but even the lands beyond it. The events of that night were completely unexpected. To appease the anger of greater powers, the authorities carried out the execution publicly, making an example of him. It was an act of violence so unreasonable and cruel that its injustice was unmatched. Yet for the man who had already been pushed beyond despair, there was no room left for sorrow. Because of the chaos that erupted outside the city, people began accusing one another, using the incident as a pretext for further violence. Fear spread everywhere. We expected screams to echo through the streets the following day. But when morning came, there were no screams in the streets of Crowd. The next day, and the day after that, the city remained peaceful, eerily quiet. An unfamiliar silence filled the air. The reason was simple. To outsiders, the events of that night made the citizens, once seen as powerless and faceless, look like dangerous beings hiding sharp fangs. We had the power to change things. We could have broken the shackles that bound us. And I realized something then. We were accomplices to all the violence and despair. But we chose to retreat. Freedom demands a price. Someone must spill blood, and someone must endure that bloodshed. So I decided to become that someone willingly for the freedom that belonged to everyone, for the atonement we all had to bear, and for the paradise we had lost. Now, returning to the present. Now then, the sacred duel dedicated to the goddess Lepre. The Black Bride versus the Little Gladiator. Let the match begin, she thought to herself as she stared at the boy. When I first saw him, he had the air of a mercenary. But now, he feels different. He looks like someone who has been stained by too much blood in the shadows. He remained silent for a moment. It's a difficult situation to understand, but nothing about it feels pleasant. Suddenly, she charged forward with an attack. But he dodged it with effortless ease. She turned sharply and attacked again, yet he avoided it once more. Shock filled her eyes. His reactions, his direction, and his movements were far beyond what even a seasoned warrior should be capable of. With such overwhelming speed, she had no choice but to keep attacking. She swung her sword again. This time, he met her blade head-on. Their swords collided. She froze in disbelief. Even his breathing, his movements, they felt like those of a completely different person. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Who on earth are you?" Arhin began swinging his sword at her. She barely managed to avoid each strike, yet Arhin did not stop. His attacks continued without pause, one flowing into the next. To her, it felt as though she were fighting an assassin and a mercenary at the same time. His stance shifted relentlessly, making it difficult to predict his next move and adding an unsettling level of unpredictability. He had surpassed the level of a beginner long ago. However, that alone was nothing but raw harshness. Suddenly, she stopped Arhin's sword. The impact surprised him, and he immediately jumped back. She watched him closely, hoping he still had more cards left to play. Inside the arena, the spectators were ecstatic. To think a mere bronze gladiator is putting up such a fight against the Black Bride. That's amazing. I knew I was right to bet my entire fortune on him. Voices rose everywhere. At this rate, isn't the little gladiator going to win? Hey, did you forget who his opponent is? It's the undefeated gladiator, the Black Bride, people said. Whatever happens, don't die in a boring way, little gladiator. Despite the taunts, the crowd had begun cheering for him. Arhin felt a chilling killing intent that seemed capable of freezing the soul itself. At the same time, a thick scent of bloodlust blanketed the entire arena. Is this the world that Fang's old master used to see? He wondered. Liam said the swords of female mercenaries and the blades of assassins from the crowd may come from completely different lives, yet the swords they wield share one common trait. They are forged to stand against enemies stronger than themselves. They are swords of struggle. In a world where the strong prey upon the weak, someone like you who has only just taken the first step may find the life of an assassin overwhelming. However, if you wish to avoid being consumed by it, you must understand that life, accept it, and make it your own. Arhin began to breathe slowly. Moment by moment, he calmed himself. Little by little, he began to consume this world and make it part of his own. Liam spoke again. It seems you have calmed down a bit. However, the true trial begins now. That girl has already grasped your capabilities during that brief clash. From this moment forward, she will hunt you with everything she has. This arena has nowhere to hide, no shadows, no bushes. In a place like this, an assassin's skills are cut in half. Furthermore, you can no longer expect your opponent to lower her guard. In this situation, your best option is to create distance and buy time 3 minutes. That is your advantage. If you use that well, Arhan suddenly froze. In less than a fraction of a moment, she appeared directly in front of him. Pointless, she said coldly. Arhan's eyes widened in shock. What? To close the distance in an instant? Tom, watching the fight from the stands, murmured softly. Oh dear, it seems you do not yet understand the true power of a sword walker. Sword walkers projected a path to surpass their opponents. They constructed an advantageous domain of offense and defense around themselves. At the same time, they expanded that path internally, drawing out tremendous strength. In doing so, they became something beyond ordinary warriors. They became true superhumans. At that very moment, the Black Bride struck. Her blade flashed forward, the attack grazed Arhan's neck. He was barely an inch away from being beheaded. Their fight continued. Her power and speed were completely different from what they had been at the start of the match. Is this the true power of the Black Bride? Ordinary swordsmanship always left small gaps between attacks. There should always be a brief opening when a swordsman resets their stance. But the Black Bride's sword had no such gap. Even when it appeared that her blade had stopped, the next strike was already flowing into existence. Her movements resembled a master painter brushing strokes across a canvas, each movement connecting seamlessly into the next. Beautiful, fluid, deadly, then she launched a powerful strike. Arhan barely managed to block it with his sword. But the impact was far too heavy. Liam spoke again. The swordsmanship of the East. Swordsmen of the Eastern continent use a style often described as martial arts. Their movements resemble nature itself. They advance as lightly as floating feathers, guided by unique footwork. Their blade paths move with elegant precision. All of it connects into one flowing motion, drawing beautiful curves through the air. Until, at last, the wave crashes down. And the moment their movement stops, that is when the final strike arrives. That moment had come. The Black Bride's movement reached its end, and she finally caught him. Arhan tapped into the sword's memories, a city that had turned into a rotting mire, where life was spent struggling to reclaim freedom while a tide of death rose steadily to one's chin. Against the corrupt bureaucrats of that land, I carried the burden of survival and ran, again and again. Yet there is not always an escape. When you reach the end of your path, there may be nowhere left to run. The opponent before me was someone I could not even dare to face, an undeniable powerhouse. I knew it instinctively. Today was the end of my life. And yet, what was this small circle? For some reason, it felt familiar, like the twisted back alleys of the crowd that had always allowed me to escape overwhelming violence. In that instant, I understood where the attack would land. With the last strength I could muster, I pushed off the wall, leaped high, and used that fleeting opening. Just like then, I saw the gap, and in that fraction of a second I struck. In the present, it was the same. Arhan found an opening in the Black Bride's flawless flow, and delivered a fatal strike. It was the instinct to survive, even in the filth, like a gutter rat. Now that I think about it, my brothers used to call me that, a genius. The Black Bride thought to herself, to think you slipped through my path and escaped in that split second, what will you do now? Even then, Arhan was struck hard in the ribcage. She is overwhelmingly powerful, he realized, far more than anyone he had faced. The enemies tied to the dagger's memories had also been skilled sword walkers, yet the Black Bride not only avoided a fatal wound but counterattacked in that same instant. His ribs felt as though they would break with even the slightest movement. In this state, not only was using assassin techniques impossible, even creating distance was beyond him. The faint chance of victory had vanished. The rational choice would be to forfeit. Even if it meant humiliation, survival would allow another chance. But he was a caravan. Such weakness did not exist for him. Liam, watching his descendant, understood. The announcer shouted in disbelief. This alone was astonishing. A mere bronze gladiator had wounded the undefeated queen, the Black Bride, and yet he continued to fight in such a state. This was no longer a simple case of rookie stomping or an execution spectacle. This was the birth of a star. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer cried. "Are you watching? Only 10 seconds remain until the little gladiator's victory. Just 10 seconds. Liam gazed at Arhan and thought, what is a genius? It finds a path in any hardship, one who discovers answers where others see impossibility, and carves their achievements into history. But you, my descendant, your talent falls short of that. Your body is fragile, your aptitude for martial arts dull. Where others grasp 10 things, you barely manage 2 or 3, that is the limit of the vessel you were born with. And yet, there are those praised as greater than geniuses. Those who may not find perfect answers, but who never give up. Those who endure and stand firm. They are called legends, the ones who create great waves in the world. The hero of tribulation. Arhan Caravan. Even when you lost everything, even when you stood alone in an abyss without light, you never let go of your sword. You possessed the qualities of a hero. As if responding to those unseen words, Arhan lunged forward, determined to fight until the final moment. Is this how it's done? He thought, but his strike missed again. The Black Bride evaded it perfectly, her movements like a graceful dance. Then, in a single motion, she pierced her sword into his shoulder. Blood burst from his mouth, splashing onto her face. This time, you fell just short, my descendant, Liam thought. But there is no need for disappointment. Today, you have surpassed yourself once more. The crowd erupted as the match came to its conclusion. The little gladiator, Liam, wins! Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. Comment next part if you want to see more, and also let us know what other recaps you would like to listen to. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.